Hello everyone, 5 Minute here. Hope y'all are having a wonderful day so far. In case some of you don't know, it was revealed that Scarecrow is coming back to Halloween Horror Nights this year, but this time it'll be accompanied by a soundtrack composed by famous musician Slash. Now if Slash is making music for Scarecrow, that means he is no longer involved with the Universal Monsters. And that's because there is going to be no Universal Monsters this year. Following the release of Epic Universe, which contains Dark Universe, and Universal Horror Unleashed, which contains a Universal Monsters attraction, both Universal parks have decided to let the IP take a break from being at HHN. Now, as a way to commemorate the involvement of Universal's classic monsters, I decided to make this video where I'll be ranking all of the Universal Monsters mazes in Halloween Horror Nights Hollywood. During his early years of being creative director for Horror Nights in Hollywood, John Murdy always thought bringing the classic Universal monsters to life for Horror Nights was a daunting task. He's been a massive fan of that franchise ever since he was a young lad. He always wondered how he would make the monsters scary enough for modern audiences that crave intense Horror Nights experiences, while still respecting the decades-old legacy and doing that universe justice. So, in 2012, Murdy made Monsters Remix, which nobody really talks about. Then, in 2018, he and his creative team brought us Universal Monsters. It was advertised as an attraction that honored the legacy of the iconic collection of films while being modernized to scare the hell out of guests. Collaborating with John Murdy with this project was Slash, which hasn't worked on a maze since Clowns 3D back in 2014. And just like the rest of the maze, Slash was aiming for a modern sounding killer soundtrack while still giving it a taste of that classic gothic horror. Once the attraction finally opened for guests, it was met with extremely high praises from both fans of Horror Nights and fans of the Universal Monsters franchise. So they brought it back every single year since, with each maze having a different story and set of characters, and of course, new music from Slash. The IP had a 6-year streak that was finally broken in 2025. Luckily, I was able to experience all 6 of these houses. So, what did I think of them? Which ones were my favorites and least favorites? Well, let's dive into all of that with this ranking. Kicking off the ranking is my number 6, my least favorite Universal Monsters house out of all of them, and that house is going to be Unmasked from 2023. This is the one that featured Phantom of the Opera, Hunchback of Notre Dame, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and the Invisible Man. The whole story is that they're all hiding in the darkest corners of Paris because they're all on the run. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah, the story didn't really resonate with me, which is mainly why Unmasked is my least favorite. I did appreciate the creative team giving some of the more underrated monsters some love, but it felt like they didn't know exactly what to do with these characters. There were like 1 or 2 set pieces that I thought were genuinely amazing, but while some of the individual scenes were cool, that's all it had to offer. It felt like it was just a collection of scary stuff happening, as opposed to the other ones that actually tell a cohesive story. Add that to the fact that half of the maze consisted of black walls with only posters of the concept art. Yeah, Unmasked overall was a letdown for me, because it didn't reach its full potential and ended up being a lackluster experience. My number 5 is going to be Eternal Bloodlines from 2024. This one is a continuation of Bride of Frankenstein Lives, where the bride joins forces with Saskia von Helsing because they both lost the ones they love from the hands of Dracula's daughter and her monstrous alliance. I actually do like Bride of Frankenstein Lives, obviously much higher on this list, but we'll get to that later on. So I already found the characters and story a lot more interesting than Unmasked. I also like that there's a little bit of variety with the scares, so it's not just Van Helsing and the bride. There's also a she-wolf, a female mummy, and like other surprise characters. Unfortunately, this does suffer the same problem as Unmasked, and that's half of the maze being nothing but dark hallways and some posters of concept art in between. And some of the art that was on the walls would have been so awesome to see in live action. They had a whole soundstage to work with that year, which, fun fact, was the same soundstage that they used to film the original Dracula and Bride of Frankenstein films. But it still felt like they were so restricted and barely scratched the surface. Yeah, at that point, it just felt like the creative team was losing steam and passion for the Universal Monsters houses. While I'm glad they stopped last year before these houses got really tired, this wasn't the worst house to end it on. My number 4 is going to be Legends Collide from 2022. This one featured Dracula, the Wolfman, and the Mummy. The story for this one is that all three of these monsters are after this amulet in hopes that it would get rid of their own curse. This is where the Universal Monster houses slowly started to feel like the collection of scary stuff happening instead of a clear story being told visually. However, the collection of scary stuff found here in Legends Collide admittedly is pretty awesome. There's quite a few stunning set pieces, and I remember the scares hitting pretty hard as well. I also think it contains Slash's most underrated soundtrack out of all of these houses, but I was pretty confused with a couple of things. For example, the involvement of the High Priest character. Maybe this is a reference to the Mummy films, but even then, what was his part of this story? Also, why does the Noobs just show up out of nowhere? It was a badass looking Siltwalker, but I don't know, it was just so random. Here's a fun fact. Usually when Hollywood and Orlando do Universal Monsters in the same year, they each do their own takes of the same story. But what was cool about Legends Collide was that Orlando's house was part 1 of a story, whereas Hollywood had the second part of the story. I thought that was kind of neat, even though there were a thing or two that was kind of inconsistent, but that's not that big of a deal. While Legends Collide was the start of the Universal Monsters burnout, it was still an all-around fun experience. Now we've reached the top 3, and these top 3 I can confidently say are some of my all-time favorite Halloween attractions, period. So don't think my number 2 spot is marginally better than my 3, these are all amazing houses. So with that said, my number 3 is gonna be The Bride of Frankenstein Lives. I've said this a lot in my channel, but I'll say it again here. 2021 was a very strange year for Horror Nights. Because of everything that was going down with the pandemic, Horror Nights that year never reached its full potential. It was disappointing, but I understand that they could only do so much at the time. Almost every maze that year felt like they were cutting corners. All except for Bride of Frankenstein. The story for this one is that the bride is hunting down Dracula's brides to steal their blood in hopes to resurrect her mate, Frankenstein's monster. Right off the bat, the facade was the most visually striking one that year, and after seeing the actual first room, I knew right away that this is going to be a good one. Out of all the monster mazes, Bride of Frankenstein felt the most theatrical. There were a lot of scenes where scare actors did less scaring and more acting. Now, in some cases that would be an issue for me, but for some reason it works so well for me here. This is located in the Parisian courtyard, but they still managed to make some great looking set pieces. The visual storytelling was at its peak here. Yeah, there were a couple of those same concept art posters that I was complaining about earlier, but it actually makes sense here because it feels like a chapter book coming to life. Also, I think the music here might be some of Slash's best work for HHN. If I were to rank all the scores, this would probably be number 1. Overall, Bride of Frankenstein Lives was amazing, definitely in my top 20 and maybe in my top 15. My number 2 is going to be Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman from 2019. I think this is the only time the creative team directly adapted a certain classic Universal Monster film. All the other ones obviously took inspiration, but were never based on any particular films. Right away, I just want to say that this is the scariest Universal Monsters house they've done. A lot of the environments were very gothic and eerie, and there was something about the scares that just really hit hard for me. I like how there were a couple rooms where the monster was facing off against the Wolfman, and I was quite literally in the middle of them. Scenes like that always make for some great intense encounters. Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman was a great continuation from the maze that came before it, and it was overall a near perfect attraction. There wasn't really anything I had an issue with. From what I remember, I think Slash only made 2 new pieces of music, and a lot of the music here was reused music from the first one, but that's the only thing I could think of that I'm could be labeled as a complaint. It's not that big of a deal, honestly. So yeah, Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman is definitely another S tier maze for me. Another one of my all-time favorites, but there was one other maze that was just slightly better. Number 1, my personal favorite Universal Monsters maze is gonna be the original from 2018. Oh my gosh, where do I even begin with this house? Back when this was first announced, this was automatically one of my most anticipated of that year. Back in my early days of being an HHN fan, I knew about John Murdy's love for the monsters, so I was excited for him that he was finally making a maze based on the franchise that made him a horror fan. I remember going to Scare LA, which is an old horror convention, and seeing the panels showcasing the details of this maze, and Slash himself pulled up on stage talking about his music, and we, as the audience, heard a little bit of his music before anybody else. I was so ready to finally experience this. and it did not disappoint. You could just tell every room was made with so much love and care put into it. The attention to detail was next level, especially compared to the other houses that year. The modernized designs of the monsters were really cool looking, and while Frankenstein's monster appeared the most, I do like how everyone gets their own chance to shine. I'm not gonna lie, when they revealed that Slash was composing the music, I was a bit worried that it would kill the vibes, but luckily, I think he did a pretty good job. He did exactly what he and the team intended to do, and that was to make a score that obviously had to have old-fashioned gothic vibes while also having a modern edge. The set design was also really good. Every single set piece was very exciting, and it helped that the scare actors did a great job bringing everything to life. I'll never forget my very first experience in Universal Monsters. On top of not missing a single scare, I walked through the climax, which was an homage to the We Belong Dead scene from Bride of Frankenstein, and the timing of that sequence was so perfect, I literally cheered. The maze that John Murdy waited years to make was finally here, and not only did it not disappoint, but it was a huge success. I made sure to experience this house as many times as possible before the end of the event. There was even a time where I had to do an emergency evacuation in the middle of the maze, which was another cool memory. I got to see most of the maze with all the lights on, so I saw all the little details that they added. I live for little memories like that, which is partially why I love Halloween Horror Nights so much. The Universal Monsters played such a big part of HHN for so long, and it's because of the success of this one house, and that is why it is my #1 favorite. That's gonna be it for today's video. It's gonna feel a little weird not seeing the monsters this year, but I'm glad they stopped making houses out of them before they overstayed their welcome. Who knows, maybe we'll see them again at HHN in the future. Maybe they'll come back with a big punch, like say maybe the creature from the Black Lagoon? Again, you never know. If you like what you saw, go ahead and click the like button. If you want to see more Halloween Horror Nights content like this, go ahead and click the subscribe button. Also, let me know down in the comments, what was your favorite or least favorite or most overrated or underrated Universal Monsters maze? I would love to hear your thoughts on any of the mazes in the comments. If you stuck around to the very end of the video, thank you so much for watching, and until then, see you all in the fog.